sending people with guns.
I didn't realize I was so captivating.
How are you guys so deep into my content?
Everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi.
All right. G'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, the podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name is Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
G'day, Pietro. Good to be back. A little bit of time between episodes or episodes that I've been on. Little forewarning. Just want to apologise for my audio. It may not be as good as usual. My headphones have gone walkabout. I have a feeling they've done what many of us would like to do under an Andrews government, and that is leave Victoria. So yeah, apologies for the lack of audio quality today.
The audio quality may be down, but the quality of your comments, as always, I expect will be fantastic, Max. The quality of our guest is also fantastic. We've got our guest is a former teacher, current member of the Victorian Upper House, the Legislative Council for the Liberal Party. Now, you heard that right, the Liberal Party, not the Liberal Democrats. We've spent a significant amount of time on the podcast bad-mouthing several aspects of the Liberal Party. It's about time we brought someone on to defend it. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Joe McCracken, MLC, to the podcast. How are you, Joe?
Good. Thanks very much for having me on.
Pleasure. So normally what we kind of do at the beginning of a podcast is we ask our guests how they came upon libertarianism. Like, we find that to be quite interesting. Now, you're in the Liberal Party, so I would assume you don't consider yourself a libertarian, but I don't actually know. So rather than assume, because assume makes an ass out of you and me, and Max in this case, what is your relationship with libertarianism and the philosophy? Where do you kind of sit in that there?
So excellent starting question. I guess my political philosophy comes from partly life experience and partly just my views on how the world should be. In terms of libertarianism, like, I'm particularly against the lockdowns that happened. I hate that freedom was restricted so much that we could barely go 5 kilometers from our home. So in terms of that, I am dead against those sort of repugnant sort of lockdown measures that everyone was enforced to endure. I'm pretty much, the philosophy is live and let live. You know, if someone wants to do something and it doesn't impact my life, well, then go for it. I don't really have a problem with too many things. And people should have the choice to do whatever they want to do, unless it's illegal or it hurts someone else or that sort of thing. So that's my broad basic view. I guess, you know, being in the Liberal Party, I do have a conservative element to me as well. But broadly, I tend to be sort of rather pragmatic in my approach to politics and try to think about what is achievable and possible rather than the ideal, because I think it's better to get 80% of what you want rather than 0% of what you want. So I've had to work with a whole lot of people from the crossbench, including the Liberal Democrats, on a number of motions to be successful. And I'll happily work with anyone to get an outcome. So as they say in House of Cards, ruthless pragmatism.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think libertarians can sometimes get stuck a little bit in the idealism of the libertarian utopia and sacrificing the good for the perfect, or whatever that expression is. Well, let me prod a little bit. Let's just circle back. Live and let live in except for anything that hurts anyone else or is illegal. Now, I think this may be somewhere where libertarianism and broadly conservatism might differ a little bit. That's very much a libertarian view, as in, you know, anything that you want to do as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. But what should be illegal is probably where there's some variation.
That's the grey area for sure.
Yeah. Is that a point of difference between you and libertarianism, maybe?
Well, some of the issues that I think that really speaks to is something like legalizing cannabis. And obviously we've got 2 upper house MPs that have been elected on that platform as well. And legalizing cannabis is an interesting one because on the one side, you think, why wouldn't you legalize it and then tax it? And, the state makes money out of it. But on the other side, there's a safety aspect. And a lot of people have concerns about people that might be affected by cannabis and their ability to make sound judgments while, using heavy equipment, driving, and those sorts of things. So that's one where I guess I'm open-minded, but it would have to be a pretty solid evidence base to justify a position of legalizing cannabis.
Yeah.
Like mostly agree with that viewpoint. The only thing I would say is with the taxing, you've seen how much cigarettes have been taxed, and it's can't really trust a government to spend tax money wisely, can you?
Well, not this one anyway.
Yeah, this one.
A Liberal government, on the other hand. But without getting into the weeds of cannabis necessarily, because the point I think stands more broadly even than cannabis. But I suppose where the libertarian argument would stand, I think, is that there might be other external harms that occur with legalizing cannabis, but that would be, of course, where you are infringing on someone else's right to not have their life hurt in some way. So that's where it would become illegal. There's nothing stopping people from illegally taking cannabis now and then hurting people anyway.
And that's true. And you look at some of the aspects of, say, the medical use of cannabis for treatment, and I've seen instances where it's been used for not just for mental health in terms of anxiety, but aspects of like schizophrenia and that sort of thing, which can be used to calm. So look, there is certainly an argument to legalize it. It's just, I guess it depends how it's managed, really.
Yeah. And again, this is probably expanding a little bit too far. But looking at how the legalization or non-legalization, criminalization of drugs occurs in other countries like the US, for example, there are so many people in prison for what is essentially a victimless crime like possession of cannabis or some other drug. And the persecution of these people is very much like it reeks of government overreach and of discrimination in certain senses.
I guess it sort of depends in a way. I mean, I might have a slightly different view on that, because if you possess an illegal substance, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to consume it yourself? Or are you going to pass it on to the market for someone else to consume and potentially have negative impacts? So I think that's a little bit of a grey area there, because if you're someone who's transporting large quantities of substances for sale, then you could quite rightly argue that you are reducing harm by taking that off the market or off the illegal black market.
Yeah, and I think this is probably somewhere where it sounds like we're going to differ a lot. I love the idea of black markets, free markets, any markets. I would decriminalize all of it for in the view that by having something criminalized, what you allow is the criminal aspect to be what takes over the market that occurs, regardless of whether something is illegal or not. If you look at the harder drugs, especially like cocaine or heroin or whatever, they come through South America and various other places where it's cartels that are running the market instead of your nice, trustworthy government regulatory body that would exist otherwise.
Yeah, because they all work so well, don't they?
Just to circle back a tiny bit, like with the libertarian philosophy and like live and let live, and again, you said like unless something is illegal, I suppose something being illegal can, like as we're seeing nowadays, become very subjective. Like, I would have wholeheartedly agreed with that 5 years ago, and I would have said like, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to fear. But then as the goalposts shift and everyday things that should be perfectly fine become illegal, I guess that's another gray area. Like let's talk about like going back to COVID and like vaccine mandates and lockdowns. They're things that I never thought would be illegal. I never thought it would be like not allowed to leave your home. So I suppose that's something where live and let live, unless it's illegal, I would definitely not agree with.
I mean, look, I 100% agree with you there. I think the only person that an individual should be taking health advice from is a health professional, not the government. So I'm against vaccine mandates.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah, and that's really great to hear, and it sounds like we probably would have loved to have had you in Parliament at the time when they were pushing all of that stuff, because that truly was a tumultuous moment there. Hold on, let me circle back and remember what I was going to say. I feel like I had something to say and it slipped me now. No, not coming
It's
back.
gone.
It's gone. Sorry.
Just like our budget surplus in Victoria, it's gone.
So there was something that you said in your maiden speech regarding libertarians, which was part of the reason we were very interested to have you on. You mentioned that the Liberal Party is a home for libertarians and conservatives and the broad church that the Liberal Party looks to be. So a home for libertarians included in that. Yep. And I grant you there are some good Liberal MPs which a lot of us have really looked towards, such as your Alex Antic, your Jared Rennick, your Bev MacArthur, yourself, hopefully in the maybe too early to say, but if you oppose vaccine mandates, then absolutely sounds like you'd be.
Bev is a very good friend of mine, and we're on page with most things. So,
well, there you go. Then very likely you as well. But on the whole, the direction of the Liberal Party is something that I think libertarians would be vehemently opposed to in various aspects. Now, the vaccine. The silence on vaccine mandates and the lockdowns and all the rest of that at the time when it was most important is certainly one of them. But not only that, the extreme budget blowouts that the Liberal Party was doing federally prior to Albo coming in, the aid to the Ukraine war, which is, libertarians are non-interventionist on foreign policies, and that war is a whole debacle that we libertarians tend to believe we should not be sending any aid to. The criminalization of aspects of free speech, where for example, the more redeeming stuff recently, where after the Nazis saluted all over the Let Women Speak rally, the federal Liberal Party raced the Labor Party to try and ban Nazi salutes and Nazi flags, as if that is anything other than virtue signaling and limiting free speech. So given that whole context of how and I say this to frame how libertarians probably view the Liberal Party on the important things that are important to libertarians, how does a libertarian, are we looking at the same Liberal Party? Is there a Liberal Party that we're not seeing from the outside? And if so, how would you defend?
Wow. I mean, there's a lot that you just said in that. I mean, where do I start? The Liberal Party for me, I think that it should be a broad church. The Liberal Party has always been based on a conservative element and a more libertarian element, and I think both can exist and both should exist, and the party has always been at its best when both have coexisted peacefully and respected the differences in philosophy, understanding that they're both from the right side of politics. I think the person who probably juggled that balance the best was Howard, and I don't think anyone has really managed to do it well since. After Howard lost in 2007, you've seen the rise of many minor parties, including the Lib Dems, or I should say the Libertarian Party now. And along with, other parties in Victoria, One Nation, who else have we got? Clive Palmer's party. We've also got the Freedom Party. So I would say the right of politics is generally more splintered than what it has been for a period of time. Those are sort of the conditions that when Menzies first came in existed, and he was able to unite the centre right of politics into one political force, and his legacy is immense. My view, as I said, is the Liberal Party has to be a broad church, and I think the worst thing in political discourse generally is that we disagree badly. I think that if we agree on 80, 85, 90% of things, that's still pretty good. But we tend to focus on the 5, the 10, the 15% of things that we really don't agree on and make that the issue. And it's okay to have disagreements on things and not change someone else's mind. The fact that you still agree on majority of things is still a positive thing that a lot of people tend to ignore. And I guess in my experience in the Liberal Party, I've been a member of the party since 2007. So the ability of people to have a constructive, logical conversation, come to a conclusion, whether they agree or not, I think it's not been a skill that's practiced and established. And I think that's a great shame for not just our party, but politics more generally. So that'll be my comments on that part of what you asked. The more redeeming situation has been an interesting one, and I never ever thought I would be, within 6 months of being elected, having to go through 2 party room votes where, well, as you know, well known, Moira has been kicked out now of the parliamentary Liberal Party, but not of the Liberal Party as a whole. And my understanding is I don't think that will happen. But I never thought I would have to go through this situation, particularly given it's been so public and, in my view, damaging to the Liberal Party as well.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, it's pretty public where I stood on the situation. I was happy to support Moira. And I think we're in 2023 and we're eroding the rights of women.
Yeah.
I just think it's sex-based rights. Men and women are different. It's just as simple as that. It's the science of biology. And it doesn't have to be any more complex than that. And that's why I have concerns about the issue around sport and the treatment of where people sort of what you identify as in what sport and which one you go to. It's a messy issue, and like as a teacher, I've taught a lot of students that have made a gender transition before, and I guess the laws in Victoria are quite draconian in the sense that if you are a medical practitioner or indeed a parent or a guardian, if you question or try to sort of have a conversation about that with that young person, it's seen as a no-no. It's not actually very good at all. And in a modern society, you've got to involve families in that conversation, as difficult as it might be. The third thing I think you raised was the issue with Ukraine and Australia getting involved in that. I think I might have a slightly different view on that one, because the free market is based on stability. And if you want those sort of conditions to operate in the free market to be as efficient as it can, you've got to have global stability. And the instability that's created at the moment with the war between Ukraine and Russia hasn't helped. Well, oddly enough, it actually has helped Australia, because we've been able to get, this fake sort of budget surplus that we've got at the moment has been on the back of high commodity prices as a result of the free market, because Ukraine in particular and their resources have not been able to be feeding into that market. So it's artificially inflated prices, which we've been able to take advantage of. But stability on the global front is a key aspect to the operation of the free market. And I think Australia does have an obligation to at least contribute towards a solution so that we can maintain the rules-based system that we have globally. And Australia is a middle power. We're not a superpower, but we're not insignificant. And for us to maintain our position in the globe, and indeed our way of life and the operation of the free market as it exists at the moment, I think it's beholden on us to at least intervene to make sure that that situation is resolved so that we can get back to normal. I hope I've covered all your points, by the way.
Yeah, no, I apologize for throwing so much into one. I didn't mean to force you to address each point individually. I'm glad you did, but now I find I've got written down my responses to all of your points. So
I think
You're gonna remind me
all
now,
whipped your
aren't you?
pen out just then.
yeah, we're all scribbling away. But yeah, so I rather than just have 5-minute responses to each other as we address all 7 points that we all made.
Yeah.
I think that the Ukraine Russia thing is, we could spend an hour on that alone, and I think look, there's points on both sides. I'm sure I disagree, but I take that there can be a free market argument be made for stability, and I think it's a libertarian quote to say that where I always butcher quotes. That's my MO on the podcast. I paraphrase things and I don't give reference to who they actually belong to. But where when goods don't cross borders, armies do. And the first thing that started to happen in those situations was boycotting and what's it called? Not allowing people to use Russian goods and oil and all the rest of it, and that sort of stuff very much exacerbates the situation.
Have you heard of the Golden Arches theory?
No, please enlighten me.
The Golden Arches theory is that if there's McDonald's in that country, it won't be invaded because the Golden Arches, the big M.
Oh, the Golden Arches.
It's a sign that trade and economic ties are too close, and that there's not going to be an invasion. Don't know if that stands true. I don't know if there's a Macca's in Ukraine or not.
There's definitely Macca's in Russia and stuff. But I remember it really famously when, and this is a ridiculous sidebar deviation from what we were talking about, but I've got notes so I can go back to it. But there was really famous when the Soviet Union fell. There was this ad on, and I always used to show it to my history classes because I'm a teacher as well. There's a Pizza Hut ad where there's like in Russia, it's like a Russian Pizza Hut ad where there's a family and they see Gorbachev walk in, and some of them are like, "Oh, there's Gorbachev. He let us fall. He let the Soviet Union fall." And the other side's like, "Yeah, but he brought us freedom and prosperity." And they're kind of arguing. And then one of them says, "And he brought us pizza." And then they're all celebrating because there's a Pizza Hut. And it's like the final capitalist slap in the face of the USSR as they're crumbling, which I thought was very funny. I think that kind of ties to the Golden Arches.
It does, exactly. It's very, very pertinent.
But so I suppose that to go back to the very sort of the nugget of the main nugget of what I was trying to ask with the question was, so where does the Libertarian fit into the Liberal Party, given that there are all these disagreements? And while I get the impression that we probably agree with you on most of these things, like the more redeeming thing is something that the Libertarian Party very much aligns with what you're saying. The aid to Ukraine, maybe not, but I'm sure there's elements within the Libertarian Party that might even disagree with me there. Vaccine mandates and lockdowns, we certainly agree with you there. I would assume that despite what the Liberal Party ends up doing, a lot of people within the Liberal Party are vehemently opposed to the spending increases and the increases of the debt and all of that, which happens. And the anti-free speech stuff also, I'm sure there's elements of the Liberal Party, yourself probably included, who are vehemently opposed to what's happening there. So I suppose my question is, how can we find a home given that despite positive elements within the Liberal Party, the broad Liberal Party is steering the big ship that is the Liberal Party in a direction that is anti-libertarian on these issues? Because, and we may agree on 85% with you, but those 5 or 6 points are probably some of the 5 or 6 most important points to libertarians. So there's not an 85% agreement with what the Liberal Party is doing on the whole.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I understand what you're saying there. I mean, in terms of the broader direction of the Liberal Party, look, publicly, some people say that Liberal Party is lurching to the right. Other people say that it's lurching to the left. I've always believed that Liberal Party represents centre-right politics, as it should. there is an argument to say that the centre of politics is shifting as well. And how do you keep track of that? What is centre? What is centre now might not have been centre 15 years ago or 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. So recognise that things do change. And I guess for me, at least, I'd hate to speak on behalf of my colleagues, but for me, at least, I tend to put my values into politics. Politics should be based on values and an overarching philosophy on what you think the world should be like. So, as I said before, the freedom of the individual and respecting the individual and their right to make a free and informed choice based on how they want to live. And seeing society as not a collective, but as a group of individuals. And one thing that gets me about the left side of politics in particular is that they preach diversity. They love diversity and that sort of thing. So diversity recognises that individuals are different, but then they treat everyone as a collective. It doesn't seem to marry up to me. Your point about the Liberal Party perhaps not being a home for libertarians, I can tell you the Labor Party and the Greens, it's like going to hell for libertarians. So I guess while we may not be perfect and we may not be 100% fit, we may not even be 80% or 60% fit. Punishing the Liberal Party at an election doesn't help the broader picture of uniting the right side of politics together.
I think that's one thing that is probably a big differing point between liberals and libertarians is that, and you mentioned it before, that you'd rather achieve 80-85% of things than achieve nothing at all. And I think a lot of libertarians were quite stubborn. It's all or nothing for us. If we don't we're philosophically sound, it's like we want things done our way or not.
Purists.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, and I can agree with that. I think, the Libertarian Party is probably born, formerly the Lib Dems, is born out of people who broadly agree with what the Liberal Party stands for, but the results are not there, or they see elements of it that are veering in a different direction. Like I think that we talked about before, and I think it's probably a good topic to talk about the expulsion of Moira Deeming. That seems so anti-liberal, and I mean that in the definition of the word, and yet that has happened within the Liberal Party, and that's part of the reason that people who maybe join the Liberal Democrats, and we get a lot of former Liberals join us. The vast majority of them are former Liberals, of which you're always welcome, mind you, if you wanted to.
Thank you so much.
But that is why they agree with everything that it says on the policies and everything. But then when it comes to moments like that, there are decisions which seem so anti-liberal. And
I'd say too, to paraphrase yourself, the old saying, you have to talk the talk, but you also have to walk the walk. And I guess I have equally been frustrated as well in the past, where I've seen policies, even at the last state election, where I thought, how do my values sit into that? They don't. Neighbourhood batteries, collectivism in energy policy. I don't support that at all. And the fact that it's not efficient and not effective is just another stupid policies like that. I don't think help us win any votes. And Bev actually says this quite often. You can't out-left the left. Don't bother trying. And I agree with that as well. We have got to really have a clear idea of what we stand for, who we stand for, and grow a spine and figure out how to best put that into policy and into practice. Because if we don't, we will continue to be in opposition, and that's not where I want to be. Yeah, that is I think we've said almost the exact same words, looking at after the results of the federal and the state elections, where it does seem like the Liberal Party is trying to out-left the left, and you're not going to win the votes of the inner city Melbourne elite that are keeping you out of power, because of course they're going to go for the more socialist out of two options that are leaning towards socialist outcomes,
And the death of the Liberal Party would be trying to go so far left that they regain that. And that's part of what you were saying. I think that the center is moving. I think that is why the center is moving, because if we assume that the left is the direction that we have to head to win votes, then naturally the Overton window will shift towards the left.
The balance shifts, yeah. But I think too, part of the challenge that the Liberal Party has, and more broadly, people on the right side of politics, is that generally speaking, we are fiercely independently minded, but also independently operating. And in order to beat is the wrong word, but to overcome the left side of politics, we have to think about how we can work together in a more constructive way. Because I'd rather a Lib Dem in Parliament, I should say a Libertarian now, than someone from the Greens or Labor Party. And I'm sure that you guys would say you would rather someone from the Liberal Party and then someone from the Labor or Greens as well. In the last state election, we saw what's known as preference harvesting. You're probably quite aware of it, which is a practice. I won't mention all the people involved, but it's quite an extensive exercise, particularly amongst minor parties. But it doesn't always result in the right side of politics supporting the right over other minor parties. For example, the Sack Dan Andrews party actually preferenced the Labor Party, oddly enough, over the Liberal Party. You would think with a name like Sack Dan Andrews, you would be putting the Labor Party last, but it doesn't. And I think part of the confusion in the name, and it's a very clever one, is to distort the market there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's delving into a whole other issues of the voting and elections going down to kind of the lowest common denominator because of the fact that we have compulsory voting, and you're then trying to reach those people with the catchiest name or whatever. The uninformed vote is what decides who ends up winning. And I think that is a practice which invariably helps the left, because it's people with like the help everyone, large welfare state, save the environment kind of talking points are very low information talking points. Like they appeal to someone on an emotional level without doing any reading. And that is the vast majority of voters, I think.
It's a good question actually to ask you, Joe, is where do you stand on compulsory voting? We are clearly against it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a really firm view on it, to be honest with you. I mean, there are pros and cons of it. If I look at it from a purely pragmatic sense, is it good to force people to vote? For the Liberal Party, does that mean that if we don't force people to vote, will we only get rusted on Liberal Party voters, rusted on Labor Party voters, rusted on Greens Party? What would that result in? Look, hard to know, really. If the average punter out there wasn't forced to vote, does it necessarily result in a better democratic system? There's an argument to say yes, it does, because only those that are informed and interested vote, and they're voting with a deliberate mind to do so. Whereas an uninformed vote is probably one which, as much as it might be worth the same value as an informed vote, and it has the same impact, it's sort of not, there's an argument about fairness there. So, yeah, I don't honestly have a firm view. I know you guys, don't want compulsory voting, but we're probably one of the only few countries in the world that has compulsory voting. So, I mean, if it dropped off tomorrow, it wouldn't be something that I would spend too much time thinking about. I would still vote because I think it's an important part of being an active citizen. But I guess I have an interest in that sort of thing where others don't.
Because yeah, in a perfect world, there's no compulsory voting, but everybody is interested in politics and is making an informed decision. Just to play devil's advocate to myself, one thing I believe, as I said, I'm against compulsory voting. I remembered something that I was alerted to. I think it happens in the US because there's no compulsory voting. What the parties will do is they'll hit some, let's say, rural town that has a history of not voting at all, or like a very low vote percentage, and a party will hit that certain town and pretty much infiltrate them. And next thing you know, this whole town is like voting 90% one way and 90% of people are voting. So that's, I guess, one downfall to not having compulsory voting is like, certain areas are open to be infiltrated.
Well, I guess so, but I mean, anyone could do that, really. Any party could do that. So that's still sort of even and fair. I guess, particularly in US politics, the worst practice I've seen is gerrymandering, which doesn't happen in Australia because we're meant to have independent bodies that set the electoral boundaries. I guess one of the other parts too is that, and you guys are probably against this as well, is the public funding of political parties. So every vote that you get is allocated a value, and that value, however many votes the party gets, they get, whatever figure it is. So if it's $1 a vote, you get 1 million votes. Well, there's $1 million sort of thing.
But it's only if you get over 4%, isn't it?
Only if you get over 4%. That's right. And whether that's a practice, whether you think taxpayer money should go to political parties for them to operate and run, is an interesting one, because the argument for it is that it promotes democracy because you've obviously got more options available. But the argument against it, obviously, is that particularly with the 4%, hurdle that you've got to get over, is that a lot of minor parties actually aren't eligible because they might get 3.5 or 3.8%, and they don't get it. And it sort of, that lower hurdle sort of does limit the participation of a lot of minor parties and shuts them out of the market. So, what do you guys think of that? I'm turning it into my podcast now.
Yeah. So broadly the Libertarian Party and a lot of other minor parties, the view is that the system does favor major parties because of not only that 4%, but also compulsory voting and low information voters making up a large portion of the population tends to lead to voting for the parties that are the most well known. Like if you're undecided, you're going to end up deciding at the last minute whether it's Labor, Liberals, or Greens or Nationals more than a minor party likely.
When you say that there's low voter information, like I can't think of a time in history where people have had more access to information than now.
When I say low information voters, I mean a voter who has not accessed any of the information and just goes to vote because they have to.
But isn't that up to the individual to make that choice, though?
It should be up to the individual whether to vote at all. And I would argue that many of these individuals are the ones who wouldn't vote if they weren't forced to.
You're probably right.
That's kind of the argument. But look, as interesting as getting into the nuts and bolts of elections are, I think there's much more interesting things to talk with you about while we've got you. So let me pivot so gracefully as I did just then towards some of the other interesting stuff that we've heard you talk about, which we very much want to hear your thoughts on. So in your maiden speech, you talk about being an openly gay man, but also opposed to the LGBT agenda, which makes you extremely difficult to pigeonhole for the left. So I would. We're very interested in hearing sort of can you expand on how you first of all came to these views and how you've found that you've then been treated within the political world that is so black and white.
Yeah, well, it wasn't really that difficult for them to pigeonhole me. They said I'm a self-loathing a gay person, self-loathing, self-hating. I thought, I don't really think I'm like that. But, this is the side of politics that's meant to preach diversity and care and acceptance, and yet they don't accept someone who has a difference of opinion. So the whole hypocrisy of that is pretty unbelievable, actually. So the broader question about that, I don't think that people in society need to be defined by one aspect of who they are, sexuality, for example. And you take that one aspect of someone, who they are, which for some people is a very deep and personal aspect. It was for me. It certainly is for me. And you define them just by that one characteristic. In fact, you create a whole culture around that. And I just think that's wrong when you've got a person if you look at the wholeness of a person, you don't just have their sexuality or their skin color or their race or their religion or that sort of thing. So that's why I don't support that culture or that sort of movement, is because I think defining yourself so narrowly by one characteristic doesn't do justice to the rest of what makes up a person. That's fundamentally what I believe. So I've never tried to sort of go out there and be a flag bearer for the LGBT, whatever the extra stuff is, because it's just never represented me. Like, and I probably made the point very bluntly, is that the rainbow flag for me, I've never felt an affinity with it because I've never felt it really represents me and how I go about my daily life. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of gay people and they just want to go about their life, living their life as free individuals, just like anyone else has a private life that remains private, as it should. You don't see straight people going out there saying, well, straight pride, and that's fair enough. I understand in the past that, there's been discrimination based on sexuality. I don't support that sort of stuff. I don't think people should be discriminated against based on anything, whether it's religion, sexuality, hair color, weight, age. I don't think that's right. Vaccine status, yes. So yeah, I guess that's probably why I took that view, is because I just think it's such a negative way of viewing the person. And there's a lot of people in society that are either gay or are gay but not out, that find it very difficult to accept themselves because of the perception of that culture that, well, if you're gay, you have to be a vegetarian or a vegan, you have to have soy lattes, you have to ride a bike, you have to live in Brunswick. Like, that's just not true, and you don't have to do that. But that's the perception and the perceived culture around that. And it's probably, in my humble view, a loud minority that perpetuate that. But the government of Victoria also perpetuate that. And I just don't support that. And people happily step up and have a crack at me because I'm standing on the shoulders of gay people that have fought for rights and all that sort of thing. And, I'm a bloke that's been able to come out without having to fear of persecution and that sort of thing. Well, that's true. But there are many people in society that have benefited from the reforms of past, like women being able to vote, Aboriginal people being able to participate in society. So I think that, as humans, we need to stop labeling each other based on skin color or sexuality and that sort of thing, and start looking at character and behavior and actions. Yeah.
There's a Martin Luther King speech that sounds a little bit like that.
It probably is. Yes.
Would like my children not to be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I certainly agree with you on everything there. Do you find when you say the government perpetuates these ideas as well, would you say that there is? I don't know how to ask this without it being a very leading question. My point is the left tends to use this strategy as of identity politics, of
yes.
Forming an identity group that is usually limited to one characteristic, such as sexuality. Now they're going with gender identity. They also go with race very often, and creating this propaganda whirlpool where it's very difficult to detach that identity with the rest of the views and voting in a particular way and connecting with all these other things that are assumed because you're part of that identity group. So would you attribute that? And as you can probably tell, we despise the left quite a lot. So that's that we're definitely on board with you there. But that playing of that game is actually more homophobic or more racist in that sense there, that they are assuming that you fit into all these other categories because you are merely one part of your identity and the rest of the person has nothing to do with you whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, it is. homophobic means that you're afraid of gay people. And like, I don't know that many people that are afraid of someone because of their sexuality. So the whole use of that word and the way that language is used and controlled by the left has not been challenged as much as it should have been.
It is hard to
And
challenge though, because like you can state that you're against the LGBT agenda, but like, you know, the left will just throw those slurs at you, which is that you're homophobic, and like it's as if that's the end of the discussion.
well, tell me that I'm homophobic then.
Yeah.
Well, you are. You're a self-hating,
Self-loathing,
self-loathing. So you are homophobic, just by
I must
virtue of
hate
that.
myself. I mean, of course I do.
From the outset, actually, like these agendas and this like identity politics, to me, it seems quite patronizing. It's almost as if you're saying, well, gay people don't know how to look out for themselves. We need to do it for them.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it delegitimizes the entirety of what a human is. And to focus so narrowly just on one aspect of a person does a complete disservice to the rest of the whole diversity of who that person is. And when we talk about diversity today, the commonly accepted definition is diversity of religion, ethnicity, sexuality, those sorts of things. Whereas we don't look at diversity in terms of ideas or experience or knowledge or those sort of things. And I think we're shortchanging ourselves because diversity is not skin deep. And the left are very good at applying a label and then creating a whole narrative and agenda out of that. And our side of politics, we're sort of like, well, live and let live sort of thing. We have to sort of challenge that a bit more, I think. And that's probably where we need to be. We need to start challenging it a lot more. And I guess when I did challenge it straight on in the parliament, I could see across the other side, scowling at me when I did that speech. But you've got to do it. You've got to put people on notice to know that you're just not going to stand there or sit there and take it. Like, stand up and be heard.
No, and well done. Like, that was fantastic. We loved that whole element there. As you were saying, the diversity of all these very superficial characteristics, when you really think about it, is what's being celebrated. But diversity of opinion is what's being restricted. And I'm assuming you agree with me on this, but I have an Italian background. My skin is white. I am heterosexual. Those are the least interesting things about me compared to my opinions and views and philosophy. I find that all to be so much more interesting, and yet it is what is interesting and what makes me who I am that is what's restricted, as opposed to the very superficial elements that are, they don't mean so much to me. I mean, a little bit of national pride, but everyone sort of has that to some extent.
Good Italian cooking.
Yeah, well, my mum's very good at cooking. As a firstborn Italian son, I'm terrible at cooking because she always did it for me. So, but the point is, yes, the things that are the most interesting are the ones that we are least allowed to be diverse on.
Yeah, and I guess if you're trying to understand the nature of a person, the nature of a person is not in their skin color or in what they wear. It's much, much more deeper than that. And you're quite right. If we restrict freedom of speech, classic example. And I used to do this with my school kids all the time. I would go and say, look, young kid there, he's black. Is that racist? Yes or no? And some would say yes and some would say no. And I'd say, is it racist to describe a color? I said, no. Well, why is it racist to describe a skin color? Oh. I mean, is it racist to call someone white?
I'm with you there. Like, at the end of the day, a fact is a fact. I think it's the intention and the malice behind the comment which matters.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, describing someone as darker skinned or lighter skinned, that's not racist in my view. So I think we need to sort of really work hard to just fight and make it clear that saying some of those things that actually don't have racist undertones at all, they're just a statement of fact.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it's Ron Paul. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ron Paul,
Yeah.
the Libertarian U.S. former senator, hero of the Libertarians. He said, truth is treason in the empire of lies, and I think he's paraphrasing Orwell when he says that as well. But that whole idea of when obfuscating the truth and creating a view of the world that needs to be accepted so broadly for any of it to make sense, as the left does, truth literally becomes treason. It becomes treasonous to say the most basic, obvious things.
Well, I think people that do speak the truth, they say that someone is black or white or whatever the case might be, they're labelled as a hater. And hate is obviously, the left are very good at using emotive sort of words to prosecute their arguments rather than logic or fact. And hate, nastiness, cruelness, those sort of concepts are used to label right side of politics. And that makes the right side of politics probably a little bit afraid to speak up. So in protecting diversity, you're actually ruining diversity by limiting the freedom of speech that people have to speak their diverse opinions. It's bizarre, isn't it?
It is very bizarre. There are a couple of things that I still want to ask you, and you're sounding more and more like a libertarian, so I am hesitant to veer away from this topic because I'm sure our crowd would very much appreciate this. But before we do run out of time, so you're a former teacher.
Yep.
I'm a teacher currently. When was the last year you taught, if you don't mind me asking?
Last year.
Okay, so super recently.
Yep.
I'm sure you're well aware of the intense left-dominated culture within teaching, within staff rooms, within curriculum, and I think you even talk about it in your maiden speech.
Yep.
Obviously, there are lots of aspects that I find personally extremely frustrating. I'd imagine you found very much the same thing.
Yes, I did. Look, I was head of my department of humanities, and I made sure that curriculum was straight down the middle and factual, and to take all the slants of subjectivism out of it.
Yeah.
As much as it can.
Yeah, and there's arguments for history can never be completely objective because it's based on whoever's interpreting it is putting.
Exactly.
There's all those arguments there. But broadly, so is there any saving of the education system from the current woke activist creating stranglehold that very much seems to currently grip it?
I mean, I think what I would call the radicalization probably doesn't happen in secondary schools so much as it happens in universities. I think young people, generally speaking, aren't so fussed about woke issues such as, gender theory and those sort of things. Most young people that I've come in contact with anyway are interested in economic issues like being able to get a decent job, earning enough money, putting a home over their head, having a decent life. Once that is settled, then other issues, perhaps like climate, perhaps like, those sort of human rights issues come to the fore. But I think at the core, people just want to be able to live a good life. That's been my experience anyway. When you talk about the education system and the infiltration of the left, it certainly does exist. And even in the way that some of the curriculum is constructed, and you would have seen it in history curriculum in particular, and the way that the perception is put forward, it's obvious to those that know what they're looking for. I guess, how do you change that? Well, if you look in education theory and practice, the two biggest factors of success in learning are, it's called shared teacher efficacy, which means teachers working together. But the biggest one is teacher quality. So if you have good quality teachers that can discern between fact and fiction and rubbish and not, that would go a long way to helping the system become a lot more robust. And it's no secret that education standards aren't going up in Australia. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in teacher training and having a much higher respect for the system. A lot of people have talked about having a master's degree in order to be a teacher. I was lucky enough to get through just on a dip ed, but I've done 2 bachelor degrees as well before that. So I had some life experience. The argument that someone goes from school to school, literally high school, university, then back into a school, probably doesn't give teaching you want people in teaching with life experience. I advocate more strongly for a apprenticeship style model of teacher training, which means that you might shadow an experienced teacher for a period of time, or maybe 2 or 3 teachers, depending on what your course is, to give teachers a better real hands-on understanding, rather than going through the theoretical parts in university. Whilst important, I think there needs to be a greater emphasis on the practical side of things and working with young people. So I hope that rant answered your question.
Yeah, your final point there about a hands-on apprenticeship style type of teaching, I think is exactly the answer that anyone who's been in teaching for a while, or who started teaching, would give, because we all know that first year or 2 you are unprepared for what you're about to go into based on what university has given you. And if you had that slower burn, you would have learned all the skills that actually are super vital to those first couple of years, and you'd be a better teacher going in, rather than, just keeping your head above water. Let alone trying to detach fact from fiction within the curriculum. You're walking into a classroom trying to give whatever you can based on whatever you can when it's your first year. That was certainly my experience. I don't know if maybe that speaks to my incompetence more than anything.
Oh, I wouldn't say
that. But I do agree with you there. I don't know if, the point of detaching from that woke, no, I won't use the word woke, slanted view of in curriculum. I don't know if that necessarily solves any of that, because, more well-informed teachers or people with more life experience still leads to the same subconscious incentives that, because education is so socialized and so public, the wage increases come from the left and from bigger government type policies, and therefore people tend to align with that when they end up teaching, is my opinion.
The reason I say better quality teachers is because teaching shouldn't be about teaching people what to think. It should be about teaching how to think.
Yes.
And that's a subtle but a very important distinction, because it's not a teacher's role to be going in and, for want of a better word, social engineering what young people churn out, what's in the brain. You have to give students the tools to survive in the real world. So to be able to critically analyze, to be able to negotiate their way through the world on their own, that's the role of a teacher. And I'm not sure that there is a shared understanding of what the role of a teacher is. Others may have a different view, particularly on the other side of politics. But my view is that we should be preparing young people for the real world. And I would love to see a very robust review of curriculum which focuses on real world outcomes rather than teaching for the sake of teaching.
I genuinely think this is why we have such a problem with mental health, and why humans are quite fragile now in regards to mental health, is because they're taught what to think, and then they come out into the real world and things aren't all daisies and sunshine, and things are difficult, and they don't have the tools to deal with it.
Yeah, there's been some work, and it's usually done in the Year 9 streams. And I've seen schools call it grit, others call it resilience, but it's basically the building up of that sort of style where they can sort of handle difficult situations. Probably last 15 or so years, there's been, I wouldn't necessarily call it a concerted shift, but it's just sort of manifested where society has sort of softened a bit, and we have to kowtow to whether it's the loudest voice or the most whatever. And I don't think that really helps people get a real world understanding that life is not exactly going to be handed to you on a silver platter. You have to work, and not just sort of, you can't just lap it up.
It seems the modern day approach is to deal with problems once they arise rather than trying to nip them in the bud. And in regards to this topic, it's, let's talk about our feelings, let's be really open and help each other through mental health, which is great, but to stop it from getting there in the first place, let's build people up to be tough, to be strong, to be able to deal with the real world in the first place. And you won't have to get to that point.
Yeah, well, both are equally important, I think, because you can't control everything in life. You've got to be able to talk about and deal with those difficult situations. But geez, if you can prevent them, wouldn't that be great?
Exactly. Yeah.
The real world's not as simple as a textbook that explains everything and asks you questions at the end of the page with answers at the back, I think is the crux of that almost. One last question to veer away again from back into the political world.
Yes.
It would be remiss of us not to point out that we were talking about the Liberal Party again. Libertarians and the Libertarian Party, as much as we may disagree with the Liberal Party and feel the need to be separate from the Liberal Party, there is no question that when it comes to federal or state election, the preferable option of Liberal or Labor is clearly Liberal. We would rather the Liberal win. And the Liberal Party has not been winning. Federally, lost. New South Wales, lost. Victoria, lost. Western Australia, lost. I don't have to tell you how many times the Liberal Party has lost. And it seems very much like that is the direction that we're heading at breakneck speed, and that is going to be the status quo for a while. And I would love to hear your input on what the opinion from inside the Liberal Party is on that. What is the future of the Liberal Party in that regard there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question itself. What is the future for Liberal Party? I can't speak for what their view might be on what the future of it is, but my view is that the Liberal Party needs to show a backbone and stand for the values that it says it stands for, not try and be what many have said as a pale, weak imitation of the Labor Party. We're not the Labor Party, and we should never try and be. So how about we actually stand for what we say we believe in? First, that's the first point. The second point, and I think the Liberal Party has only just caught on to this, is that there are many people coming into Australia from different parts of the world. Naturally, those people are actually quite conservative or libertarian, particularly from migrant groups in Africa and parts of Asia. But we don't seem to be able to capture that. The Labor Party are very, very good at infiltrating those groups and setting up fake community organisations that are meant to be representative of those communities. And I think there is great opportunity there for the Liberal Party to reach out to show those communities that we are actually their party. And we welcome them all. We welcome them all. So, and the third one, I think, is, I've been grappling with this for a while, is that the old political saying is that, when you're in your 20s, you're a socialist, but when you're 50s, you're a capitalist. That trend doesn't seem to be happening anymore. Why aren't people becoming conservative when they get older? I think the simple fact of the matter is, well, they've got nothing to conserve. So if you don't own a home, or if you don't own private property, why would you care about property rights? If you don't have anything to conserve, to take care of, to manage, why do you care about rental laws, for example? So the Liberal Party has got to have real policies that make an impact so that young people, particularly young people wanting to buy their own home, to have their own piece of earth, to have control, be the master of their own destiny, we've got to have real policies that make a big impact on that. For me, I think home ownership is the biggest part of that. The biggest asset that anyone will own in their life is a home. And we need to make that as achievable as we possibly can. A lot of young people see it as unattainable at the moment, and there's a parliamentary inquiry going on, which I sit on, about rental and housing affordability. Well, I dare say we'll hear a lot about that. But to be able to give people their own patch of earth that they can control and they can run, they can do is what they want, they can build on what they want, they can have what they want in their own house. That is the ultimate freedom, the ultimate master of their own destinies. And that doesn't seem to be happening anymore. So we need to encourage that.
I agree completely that part of it is there is nothing to conserve. I suppose I would be remiss to not at least mention the libertarian insight to that same question of why are people not capitalists by 50, as the saying should go, and they are socialists by 20. The libertarian response to that is, so the state is growing larger than it has ever grown before in human history. We live in in various countries around the world, probably everywhere. The state is bigger than it has ever been in human history, and the state expanding does so invariably at the expense of the private sector. Public sector grows where the private sector shrinks. Now, if the private sector is shrinking, that means less and less people make their livelihoods or are employed by the private sector, and more of them are employed by the public sector. Why would people vote against increasing the public sector when it's the public sector that pays them and allows them to put food on the table? So it's this expansion of the state that makes it impossible for people to become capitalists, because they aren't. They myself included, I'm paid for by the public sector, even though I clearly, by virtue of opinion,
I was as well.
Disagree. Oh, I currently are as well.
I currently am, and I was as a teacher. Catholic system's a bit different, but it's still, get funding from the state. So yeah, I agree with you completely. It is a massive societal challenge.
That's one thing I was going to bring up, and we've sort of come full circle, because you started like earlier in the podcast talking about the legacy that Menzies left on the Liberal Party. And I'm pretty certain it might even still be stated on the Liberal Party website. And, that is small government and free markets. We've spoken about free markets. Small government, I mean, if the Liberals were to be elected, whether it be state or federally, again, do you think that the size of the state would shrink and the public service would shrink, or the public sector would shrink? Or do you think it will keep expanding?
I hope that we don't get afraid of this 3-letter word called cut.
Yeah.
And we've got to be able to say, look, this is ridiculous. I mean, Daniel Andrews, when he came into office, the Premier's private office was, I think it might have been a dozen staff. There's now hundreds in there. Literally over 600 staff in his private office. The mind boggles at how much that's costing you and me and the taxpayer. That's just got to be cut. It's as simple as that. And unnecessarily government programs have to be cut. And when you say the word cut, it's like you're spooking the sheep out in the paddock. Oh, we can't have cuts. The Labor Party were very good at the last election saying Matthew Guy, he's the cuts guy.
We had a laugh at that. We saw those billboards up saying Matthew Guy, the cuts guy, and we were just like, cool.
Yeah. What, do you want us to vote for him?
I think good. But a lot of people in politics are afraid of spooking the sheep, so to speak. And the word cut is just, it's, you imagine the imagery of it. You're slicing something open, you're reducing it. People then think, oh, well, how's that impact me? What are you cutting of mine? So, but the expansion of big government, I mean, look at the SEC in Victoria. We're bringing back the SEC. I mean, that is a complete disgrace. SEC was sold off. Jeff Kennett did it. Good. And Dan Andrews wants to bring it back because, in his words, privatisation has failed. I mean, you could not get more overt socialist agenda if you tried. And most people in the public I want to say haplessly oblivious to it, but maybe they're not oblivious. They're just going along with it. That's not good.
Yeah, and that harkens back to the idea of, I think, the low, what I mean by the low information voter is that people respond to these emotional appeals like, you know, the disdain at the word cut, rather than understanding the broader picture of what a cut means. It means less government spending, which in turn means that the government has less of your money out of your pockets to spend, it's that alone, which should be a fairly easy leap to make, is
I mean, the classic example, and the state government have done a very good job of this, is you guys would probably be aware of the power saving bonus. Everyone gets $250. But if you break it down in layman's terms, individual citizens pay tax to the government. The government then employs someone. That someone then takes the money that is being paid to the government and redistributes them via the power saving bonus. What a scam that is.
In the meantime, losing some money in managing it, and they take their own wage, and there's the money that gets lost while spinning it around.
Wouldn't it be better just to say, well, find out how much the program costs and let's cut taxes to the equivalent if you scrap the program? Simple.
Yeah, absolutely. We are at the hour mark, so we probably should wrap it up. Was there any last messages or thoughts or ideas that you wanted to leave us with before you go, Joe?
We have covered a broad range of things, haven't we? I just think that the right side of politics needs to try and work together. At the last state election, the right fractured tremendously, and we can't ever let that happen again. So as much as we might have disagreements amongst each other, we've got to work together, because the bigger picture is that we're being outplayed by the left very, very well.
Yeah, I think that is a really important message, and I think that if the Liberal Party goes more in the direction that you're suggesting, or that you seem to veer yourself, there's no reason why our preferential voting system that we have couldn't work in our benefit, and a party like the Libertarian Party go hand in hand and be to the Liberal Party what the Greens are to Labor, in that we can ensure that you win rather than Labor.
Well, we happy to work with you anytime you like.
And you're always welcome aboard when you do invariably decide that you'll join the Libertarian Party, because you've had a change of heart.
That goes two-way street. If you want to join the Liberal Party, we're a broad church.
Thank you very much for your time, Joe. Thank you for watching. To our viewers, you can find us on Spotify, you can follow us on Instagram, and you can subscribe to us on YouTube. That's it. Thank you very much for watching, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks, Joe.